Thanks.
Good.
Now, our next topic, well, the importance of a jockey or not when making your selections. Love to have your thoughts as well. I'm sure many of you have lucky jockeys you tend to avoid when you're punting. Think, oh no, I can't back one with him on board. I mean, we had an email earlier, didn't we, talking about doesn't like backing Jamie Spencer on short price favourites. But I know you're big into the Whitley figures, aren't you, about jockeys, the effect they have on horses, how some jockeys improve horses' chances.
Yeah, there are two schools of thought here, which Hugh will represent the other school of thought in a second. But I believe that the proper assessment of jockeys is one of the biggest edges available to the punter, simply because it's done so badly by the mainstream. And you mentioned the Whitley jockey ratings, which are available at Racing Research, computer racing form. I've done a tremendous job over the years in separating out the various variables that affect a horse race from the jockey. And when you do that, you find that the best jockeys improve the chances of horses by about 1.5 lengths to 2 lengths over jumps on average, and about the same and a bit more sometimes on the flat. And that's the average effect for horses who they are particularly difficult to ride or something, or whatever they have particular affinity for. It can be even more than that. And the numbers at the top of the Whitley ratings, I'm not going to discuss for various reasons who they are or who does badly. If you want to do, you'll have to actually buy the products. But these figures are worth their weight in gold, in my opinion. And each year they are borne out to be vital in assessing the chances of horses who are ridden by that jockey for the first time. That's the significant thing. Obviously, the horse has been ridden by a jockey its last 10 times. It doesn't really matter who the jockey is, because his effect will have been included in the horse's form. But if a new jockey takes over, like there was one yesterday, Richard Kingscut took over on a horse. I mean, I'm a huge fan of his. The figures bear that out. And the horse showed improved form. I'd been ridden by Jim Crowley, who was an excellent jockey. But Richard Kingscut, according to the figures, is a rider who tends to improve on the efforts of other riders. And I think that is not factored in the market in any shape or form. I think that is one of the few things left that isn't.
And you can obtain these figures. You can purchase them for the year.
They're not the only way. This is not an advertorial. That's not the only way to assess riders. Hugh may touch on some others, and we've got various other people. The Proform people have been in touch this afternoon. They do an excellent job. Dave Macaulay, thanks Dave for all your work. He's got his own methods. Other punters have got ways of but the point is that they're thinking about it quantitatively rather than sort of looking at counting statistics, which are the bane, I think, of horse racing. The idea that Tony McCoy is the most effective jumps jockey because he rides the most winners. Well, that may or may not be true. I happen to think it's not true. I happen to think that Ruby Walsh is more effective than Tony McCoy, but there's not much in it. But the point is that the way we determine jockeys' championships is not an adequate way of determining the actual efficiency of the jockey, because the horse is 95% of the equation.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, let's get Hugh's thoughts. I mean, I know that you've obviously got a different idea to James on that. Do you
Well, actually not that different. I certainly think that the way that the Whitley ratings try and incorporate as many variables as possible and look at them objectively is far superior to anything that's available that I'm aware of anywhere else. The point I'd probably like to make is that I think we as punters tend to make quite subjective judgments about jockeys, and we see them in black and white terms. I can't have him, I like him, rather than taking a more probabilistic approach. For instance, with the Sam Whaley-Cohen thing and long run, people tend to go into one of two camps. Either he's a perfectly good rider, he's won a King George and a Gold Cup, or he's no good for the horse, I can't have it at all. Whereas I think the approach we should be saying is trying to work out or decide by whatever method how good he is and how that should impact on the price of the horse when you're considering backing it or not. Because too often people, I think,
he's not very good. He's not very good on other horses, though. He's not very good. Ruby Walsh is a lot better than him.
Oh, okay, but there still has to be a price. There's no price at which you back long run.
Oh no, that's different.
That's the point I'm trying to make. There is at some stage.
I'm talking about what the media said. There's so much claptrap about he's perfectly effective. He knows the horse. It's very probably wrong. But go on, Karen.
Yeah, I mean, there's just the point I'm making is that we're all going to have different opinions on how bad or otherwise how good he is. But clearly, there is a possibility that he could win the King. He's already done it once. Clearly, there's a possibility he could win the King George on long run. And I think too often we tend to jump into quite maybe not prejudice, but subjective opinions about jockeys without actually trying to put a value on them.
Absolutely.
And that's where something like the Whitley ratings,
Yeah.
or I did actual over expected ratings, which look at
I
the
think those are
price of a
good.
horse.
Those are good.
I think they're definitely the way forward, rather than, Jamie Spencer's a jockey who polarises punters. There's lots of others, and I think you need to have in mind, right, well, when that jockey's on board, I want an extra point on the price that rather than just say, because you wouldn't say that about a horse. You wouldn't say that about all horses, that, I can never, that's a horse I always want to back, that's a horse I never want to back.
No.
You look at the price, and I think we need to approach jockeys in the same way.
How much we discuss pace and tactics and things, it's inconceivable to me that there aren't big differences between members of the profession, just like there are big differences between footballers, or big differences between people in the media, or big differences between anything you do. People who carry hods. I mean, there are good ways of doing things and bad ways of doing things. Riding horses requires you to adhere to very pressurised set of precepts, saving ground, going at an even gallop, taking the horse's temperament into account, strength in the saddle being a small but significant factor as well. The age of a jockey's decline. The Whitley figures tell you, for example, that there's an ageing curve for jockeys. There's a lot of nonsense spoken about how they gain wisdom, which offsets their advancing years. Well, it doesn't. Not that much.
That wouldn't tally with any other sport, to be fair,
no,
would
exactly,
it? There's very few other sports where there isn't an ageing curve.
They've got more chance than in other sports, but they're still, to say that they don't decline with age, and that people say, well, Kieran Fallon's as good as ever. No, he's not. That underplays how good he was in his physical peak. He's only human.
Lots of emails and questions coming through, so we'll spin through some of those now if we can. Chris was asking about, do you take into effect, I always look at the longest traveller. I mean, it's quite often something people say, oh, this horse has come 240 miles down from North Yorkshire to run at Brighton. I think you made a good point. If there's 2 or 3 coming down from the same yard, then perhaps we should.
I think you've got to look at each incident in isolation, look at the race they've targeted for, try and work out what the trainer's past records are with that kind of situation. I don't think there's a shortcut to saying, oh yeah, this has come. I'm just thinking of James saying it's not come for the good of his health. But
why not just look at its chance in the race, though?
Yeah,
What's
fair
the
enough.
advantage?
Yeah.
Is there an advantage? That's what I suppose.
I mean,
the question.
for instance, Sir Mark Prescott, I don't know the last couple of years, but I know when I did some research a few years ago, the horses he sent a long, long way to places like Scotland have a very, very good record. And yeah, they do tend to be significant. But we know that he's a careful placer of his horses anyway, and you could possibly make a case for saying that wherever he places horses, there's been a lot of thought gone into it. In some instances, it might be just trainers thinking this horse is absolutely no good, I need to send it to the weakest racecourse in the country, let's send it there. So there may be all sorts of different reasons. So I don't think you can generalise and say, yes, I should always be interested in long travellers.
Basically, all trends-based thinking, and by that I mean for the pulp trends, I don't mean the few people that use them intelligently and do adhere to sample sizes. Most of it is such arrant nonsense that you can actually benefit considerably by a punter by reading their publications, because it teaches you how other people might think if they were erroneous. It teaches you the most common fallacies made in understanding horse racing.
Phil says, do horses start short at prices because of the trainers? It does quite often happen, doesn't it? You have horses that start at false prices because they're trained by Sir Michael Stout.
But the trainer's a highly important variable when you don't know anything else about a horse. When you do know that, for example, a newcomer with a given pedigree would run to a higher figure if Michael Stout trained it than if, say, who do I want to pick up? David Evans, yes. And that's not because David Evans isn't as good a trainer. It's because on average, and we're always talking on average, Michael Stout gets better stock to train.
Yeah.
So if you were dealing with a horse that had run a promising 4th in a Newmarket maiden on its debut, the gap then closes between David Evans and Sir Michael Stout, because then you know something more about the horse than just its trainer.
A classic example over jumps used to be when Martin Pike was in his pomp. There'd be horses transferred to his yard that had been tailed off at 25 to 1 on their previous umpteen starts, would be switched to Pike. They'd run in a little handicap hurdle at Taunton, and they'd open up at 3 to 1. And that would probably turn out to be a good price, and that's solely the trainer. Nothing else had changed other than the trainer, and that still happens a lot with stables. So, I've talked a lot about people like Lawney Hill and Nick Williams and David O'Meara, who have a habit of improving horses from other yards. And the trainer is a huge, as James says, it's a hugely important factor.
We're going to have to move on. Time